I'm going to have to apologize. I do not listen to you.
Now here's Tim Hill and Bill Gunter on 107.5 The Game.
Why would that elicit a giggle, sir? That's not funny. Will Muschamp not listening to this show? You find that humorous, do you?
I do.
Okay. I did too.
At least he apologized, right?
It's true. I think it was a non-apology apology. Welcome into your week. I'm Tim Hill. He is the Captain Carey Rich sitting in for Bill Gunter this morning. I think it might be spring break in the mind of Bill. So watch out
in his
out
mind,
there.
yeah.
Hope everyone survived the weekend okay. It was a little hairy yesterday, huh?
Wow.
Get a little intense at your house?
Yeah, that when they said that there definitely was some kind of tornadic activity or something in Lexington area. So.
By the way, that is the weather nerd's favorite phrase. You understand that, right?
Well, I didn't want to say a full-on tornado because I don't know for sure. They're saying they're kind of investigating that, but...
All this stuff, just the weather nerds eat up. And I say this like one of my first buddies out of school when I got my first job at a local TV station was a weather guy. And he considered himself a storm chaser and the whole thing. And it was just like I had never even considered that someone would get excited about weather that could be very critically dangerous to people. But he just saw it specifically from a scientific deal. I was like, oh, yeah. Oh, you see, this is going to happen. I'm like, you're getting excited about that? What is wrong with you? But that's what some people do.
Yeah.
But fortunately, it hopped over your house too?
Yeah, it didn't. It impacted some, like some big trees in our neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
The main roads got blocked and stuff for a little while. But
did you have to dodge any trees on the way to work this morning?
No, there were a few limbs that continued to blow down or something, but nothing terrible.
Carrie, what about you? Well, all clear?
All clear, but I'll tell you one thing. If I wasn't awake this early Monday morning before I walked outside, I definitely found a way to wake up. Weather was a little bit different this morning compared to the last 3 or 4 days.
Okay.
A lot cooler.
Yeah,
Yes.
Wake you up. I had to take the family down to the garage for the first time just in case, making sure everybody's safe.
Wow.
Keep them away from the windows and all. Mm-hmm. I mean, they didn't know. They just had fun. The 3-year-old found the soccer ball down there. He was having a good time. So I had to tell him he couldn't bring it back up in the house. That was the outdoor soccer ball. So he'll probably look forward to the next time we can go down to the garage and kick the soccer ball around. But from a sports perspective, a solid weekend, I would say. Carrie, I know you watched a lot of NBA playoffs.
I watched a lot of NBA playoffs, but my weekend got started off certainly on the right foot down in Orangeville. City of Columbia, we started our second season of the Miracle League baseball.
Nice.
Season for the mentally and physically challenged. We call it Adaptive Rec. It's actually the baby of Ray and Karen Tanner. And they partner with the City of Columbia along with Richland County. And we started our second season this past Saturday. And what a joy to see the parents and see so many young kids come out and just have an opportunity to have a normal recreational day. And so that was fun. And the rest of the weekend was just gravy after getting it started off on that foot.
So if you were about to dial us up on the Love Chevrolet phone lines at 803-404-6100 and just complain about what you watched over the weekend, keep that in mind. I think that's one of the reasons why you can come in here, have a smile on the face, and not take things too seriously.
Absolutely. Even kill is what I call it.
Oh, come on now.
What about resolve?
Okay, there's some resolve for sure.
There's some resolve. You don't think even kill?
No, you get going a little bit. You get riled up real quick. But having that to balance it out keeps sports in the proper perspective, I think. And we try to do that on the program here. So if you have some negative feelings that you would like to express after the Gamecocks get swept on Saturday and don't score a run, I get that. Not telling you can't do it. I'm just trying to make sure that you keep in mind exactly the proper tone, maybe, to keep when expressing those feelings.
There's no such thing as a proper tone when you're talking fans and sports.
Okay.
There's no such thing.
Okay.
I think that's the $64,000 question that people have been trying to answer forever, and it hasn't been answered, and I don't see it ever being answered. There's just an emotion attached to sports, especially at this level, that will always make it sometimes a little bit unreasonable, sometimes a little bit unfair.
Sure.
But you don't ever want to rob fans of the passion. You don't want to rob them of the excitement. Certainly you don't want to rob them of the the level of interest. But anytime emotions are involved, emotions are a whole lot more powerful than reasoning. So you're not able to see beyond that emotion and understand that this is your number one, and it's probably not going to be like it was when Ray Tanner was here, 4, 5, 6 years ago. Probably going to need some time to at least get to that point. But it's been interesting reading and listening to the narrative associated with Kingston and the baseball program so far. And I do feel like it's at a point where the fans may have accepted the fact that, this is probably going to be a season that that you're going to need to rebuild and kind of get back on the right track. And I think that's important. Now, it's easier said than done.
Well,
so we'll see.
It's a reset point for Gamecock baseball for sure.
I like that word better than rebuild.
Because, again, what we saw on Saturday, we saw 0 runs, but it's not like Arkansas, one of the best teams in the country, going into that thing ranked number 3. It's not like they made it embarrassing for Carolina. Now, they did have a perfect game going just 3 outs away, and they played 2 7-inning games on Saturday because Friday night's game got postponed because of bad weather. So Arkansas 3 outs away from a perfect game on Saturday. Justin Rowe broke that up in the top of the 7th inning, and the Gamecocks had a chance to tie things. I mean, that brought the potential tying run to the plate. They only lost 2-0. They lose 2-0 in that game. They lose 3-0 in game number 3. It continues the trend that we've seen with this baseball program now for the past year and a half. We're exactly halfway through the SEC season, where the talent is there to win a big game. They did that Thursday night at Arkansas, 3-2. They've beaten Clemson this year. They've beaten Florida this year. They completely crushed Kentucky on the road a week before this past weekend. But putting it together and doing it consistently has been the issue, and that's another series loss for Carolina. 6-9 now, halfway through the SEC season.
And that's the key. You could be good enough. You can always be good enough to win one game, but how do you find a way to sustain it? Obviously, year number 1, you need to get more of your pieces. You need to get players that are more compatible to your style, but you need time to do that. And in today's climate of college athletics, I don't necessarily know whether time is always going to be available. And what I found interesting, you go back and look at some of the recent hires, the last several years. You look at Muschamp. Well, I don't think people gave him a year because let's remember, the pendulum swung with Muschamp. There weren't a lot of folks on board with the Muschamp hire. Mm-hmm. And after the year number 1 and when you're transitioning, any program in the country is probably going to have some rough spots, with the exception of 1 or 2 that find a way to catch lightning in the bottle at the right time of the year. So you tend to forget that, that coach is here for is here for a reason. Unless that coach left to take a job somewhere else, you have a new coach in place for a reason. And most of that centers around the fact you probably weren't good enough the last couple of years, which calls for a coaching change. The pendulum did swing with Muschamp. They're finally on board with him. They are behind him, especially with the way he recruits and what they were able to do last year. But when Frank got here, he was given time because we saw the situation Darren Horn left this program in. He only had a few scholarship players. He was given time. For whatever reason, it doesn't seem to be the case for Kingston. Even though there was a coaching change again, there seems to be a thought of getting it done instantaneously. There seems to be a thought of, because of what baseball used to be, that baseball is always in position to win at a high clip, and that's not necessarily the case. But in fairness, I do like Kingston. I like his resolve. I used the word resolve earlier on. I think he operates with the resolve, and you go back and look at that one instance when he got hit by the ball and he didn't flinch. That epitomizes him.
How would you react? That's how it sounded right to his chest. What would your reaction have been? I told people, I was like, here's how that would have sounded if this would have happened to me.
He did.
The
next word or two was sort of, had a little more oomph to it.
I mean, the microphone would have picked up any sound he would have made.
Yeah.
Like any kind of... there was nothing.
Nothing.
Well, how would it have sounded if this happened to you, Carey?
In my younger days, I would have.
No.
Right.
I don't want any of that garbage. Right now, son. But this didn't happen to
predict anything like that. That's
You
a
can't
natural
predict
reaction.
it. I'm going to throw something at you this show.
Reaction,
Then.
Tim.
We don't have to predict
How do you
it.
predict something like that? That's a natural reaction.
You don't know how you react? I think you do. You just don't want to tell us.
Somehow I see that happening to Gunner. Well, he even admitted that I think he would have been down to the ground. Well, with
we
the
know
twisted
how that would
ankle.
have sounded. Come on. That's pretty obvious. So tell us about this new Gamecock basketball player.
T.J. Moss, 6'4" point guard. Originally, he's from Memphis, but he played his last year of high school in Finley Prep out in Las Vegas. And those in the basketball world know Finley Prep is the West Coast Oak Hill. They play a tough schedule. They're able to attract some of the top talent. But he's been a priority for Frank Martin and his staff over the last couple of weeks, and had offers from schools like Alabama, Texas A&M, Minnesota, Oregon State. And he was a guy that wanted to play. He and his father wanted to play for Frank Martin, wanted to be a part of the program. And 6'4", long-rangey, dual-threat type of PG that can not only score the basketball, but he can make plays for himself. One may look at his stats and say, wow, he didn't score a whole lot. Well, what a lot of people don't know is his junior year when he played for Penny Hardaway. His junior year in Memphis, they won the state championship. He was the lead scorer. He had averaged 22, 23 points a game for that team. Now, fast forward a year and go to Finley Prep, where you have more talented guys around you. You don't need to be that guy to score 22, 23 points a game. So he adjusted his game. I think it shows his versatility, which is why Frank and those guys were excited about getting the commitment from T.J. Moss.
Mm-hmm. And where do you feel like he fits in now with the next year's team, assuming Rakim Felder is back as the starting point guard? I think is where most people assume. You got Justin Minaya returning. He was a tremendous contributor his freshman year, more the two-guard kind of guy. And if Brian Bowen can find his way to eligibility, you feel like you got him penciled in as a 3. You feel like T.J. Moss adds some solid depth in the backcourt, a guy who can step right in and be a, I don't know, what, 6th, 7th guy, 8th guy somewhere. It just depends where he's going to fit in the mix.
Yeah, it all depends. I mean, obviously, when you have experience at this level, experience is very, very important. But you never count out a young man like a T.J. Moss because he benefits from that schedule that he just played at Finley Prep. They're used to playing on the big stage. They're used to playing against some of the best high school kids across the country. So that gives him a little bit of an edge when it comes to the learning curve. He won't be your typical freshman. Now, he'll still be a freshman, but he won't be that typical guy when it comes to not having an understanding of what the competition, the level of competition is.
Then let me go directly to the heart of the matter.
Yeah, I see where you're trying to go, but I'm ready.
Because I feel like Carolina got at least one of those guys, and you could argue 2 of those guys in their freshman class last year, and the more highly touted guys actually turned out to not fit nearly as well, especially early on, or, I mean, you could argue at all. So, and I always feel like when it comes to Frank Martin, when it comes to Brad Brownell, when it comes to a specific type of coach, and most of them in college basketball do start on the defensive end and say, you got to make sure you don't hurt us here before I can think about putting you on the court.
Right.
So is Moss that kind of guy defensively who can come in and guard the ball like Frank Martin expects the ball to be guarded?
Well, nobody will be able to do that in year number 1 for Frank Martin. I don't care how good you are. We saw McDonald's All-American and P.J. Dozier, who could have gone anywhere in the country that came here, and we saw how his freshman year was.
Complaining about the foul trouble from Frank.
Exactly. And at 6'7", he was having to learn to guard a 6'6", 6'1" guy out on the perimeter in a very, very aggressive manner. So it's going to be an adjustment for anyone to guard the way Frank wants you to guard. Sure. It took Dwayne Notice 2-3 years to be able to do it. But when it comes to recruiting, it's all about compatibility. So coaches, they're very strategic, they're very deliberate and very intentional when it comes to prospects and how a prospect's skill set fits into what they need them to do once they get on campus. So he'll have a chance to come in and play, and very nicely and respectfully said, obviously Rakim Felder has has experience, but Rakim Felder let the team down last year. So if nothing else, this lights a fire under Rakim Felder's feet, and which is what a program is all about. You can't have guys relaxing. You got to have a guy breathing down your back, breathing down your neck. And you got to have a guy understanding that if I don't do my part, if I don't hold my end of the bargain, then you know what? There's a guy breathing down my back, breathing down my neck that's vying for what I'm now occupying. So what it does is it breeds inner competition. And when you have inner competition within a team, it spells out onto the court. Because you got to go hard. You got to dive for that loose ball. You got to run a little bit faster. You got to fight through that screen. You got to get that loose ball. You got to get that rebound. You got to do all of those things because you got a guy behind you that's ready to play. And I think also from a preparation standpoint, it gets you and gives you an opportunity to prepare for what you're having to play against in the SEC. And you mentioned Brian Bowen, Tim. He's the key. He's the key for this basketball team. If and when he becomes eligible, you're talking about a team that will be one of the best teams in the SEC next year. And when I make these projections, I don't just make it looking at South Carolina. I look at all of the other teams in the SEC. I look at what they're losing. I look at the important players that are now departing the programs. I look at their reliance on new guys having to come in and impact programs, which is always a crapshoot. Mm-hmm. You know, ideally, unless you're Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, Kentucky, the Blue Bloods, ideally you want your newbies to come in and add to the product that's already in place. You don't want to be a program where you're hoping and wishing for the newbie to put the product on your back and run with it.
Mm-hmm. That's a bold statement for a guy that hadn't played any college basketball, and Brian Bowen. I mentioned the other highly touted guys. David Beatty is the guy last year who had the reputation coming in as one of the best players in the country and just never found any kind of rhythm in Frank Martin's system. How does Brian Bowen and his game, how does it translate to the college game better than some other guys who are really highly touted? By the way, TJ Moss, this most recent commitment, is touted as a 4-star type point guard. I know, I just see it in your face when I say that you have a similar evaluation of the star system and the recruiting hype that I do.
About stars, don't tell me what a guy's 4-star, 5-star. You know,
but Brian Bowen is that guy. He's a 5-star guy, the most highly recruited guy to ever come to the University of South Carolina.
Well, but the reason he gets the type of attention he gets is not because he's a 5-star kid. It's because of the schools that were involved. It's because of he was a McDonald's All-American. With all due respect to David Beatty, he was a McDonald's All-American. So you're talking about one of the top 24 kids in the country. And I'll also say this, when the announcement was made that Brian Bowen was coming to the University of South Carolina, I had one of their assistant coaches tell me that by the time he got off the plane, he had already received 10 text messages from different NBA coaches wanting to know the schedule so they can come in and take a look at this young man. And I've even had exchanged a few text messages with some NBA personnel about his intentions and wanting to get to Columbia to see the kid. So very, very respectfully said, I don't think David Beatty or any other freshman had those type of phone calls to inquire about a practice schedule. But he just brings a different skill set that South Carolina doesn't have right now. And you know who they're going to be defensively, Frank, every time out. They're going to be stingy, physical, make it uncomfortable. That's who they're going to be, rugged, nasty. Now you bring a guy with a skill set that makes it a little bit easier to score points because – and Frank and I had this conversation in St. Louis at the SEC tournament. You could be as good as you want to be defensively. But at the end of the day, you know what you got to do?
Score. You
got to score. You got to put that basketball in the cup is the way we used to call it back in the day. You got to get it in the cup, Tim Hill.
Come on. It was the peach basket back in your day. Come on. Who are you kidding? So defending champion from Columbia, former Gamecock, Wes Bryant, world's #1, Dustin Johnson. Even my 5-year-old got sick of seeing his RBC commercial. He's like, we've seen this a zillion times. That's all they played yesterday, but he's got a new sponsor. They are also the sponsor of the Heritage, so he was playing in this thing. Dustin finishes tied for 16th. Good day on Sunday, but relatively struggled. I say struggled. He is the world's #1 golfer, so we put him at a different expectation level, but he finishes 7 under for the tournament, tied for 16th. Wes Bryant, the defending champ there at the Heritage, tied for 42nd. I believe, at -3. We had a couple unfamiliar names battling it out down the stretch. Siwoo Kim kind of in control on Sunday. He's from South Korea. He made me feel a lot better about my golf game, Carey. Not that I could ever hit the shots that he hit, but he had some very makeable putts. I think we all see putts out on the PGA Tour, and if they're within, 6, 8 feet, 10 feet, we say, oh, we can make those things. Mm-hmm. He consistently missed his down the stretch, and that caused a playoff with Satoshi Kadera, and Kadera ends up hitting a long putt on the third playoff hole. They played 18 twice and carried things over, and then they go to the par 3 17th. Kadera gets the birdie there and gets his first win on the PGA Tour, and now he'll stick on the PGA Tour for a long time, just his 15th PGA Tour event. And Satoshi Kadera, the surprise winner, I think, for a lot of us over the weekend at the Heritage, just shows you how, I think, remarkable the win was last year for Wes Bryan. It's like, oh, yeah, sure, South Carolina, first ever South Carolina native to win it, and first PGA Tour win, really a storybook deal. I think this year's finish was probably more representative of what will happen, what is likely to happen when you have the world's best players down at Hilton Head, that some guys that you're not expecting to will end up getting a win. Like Luke Donald won this thing a lot of times. Boo Weekley randomly won it back-to-back.
Doesn't that make it fun, though, when you have
Absolutely.
Random guys winning? And I was not a golfer. Neither do I follow it, I must admit. But there was a lot of Dustin Johnson on Twitter, and obviously with him, I saw someone correct someone else on Twitter. They said he was a Columbia native, and he said, no, he's not a Columbia native. He's Dutch Fork, Irmo native.
He's from Irmo. Okay, if you want to get after it that way.
Territorial.
Well, a lot of guys with South Carolina ties in this thing, and there are always Billy Haas, the best of those guys, tied for 7th at 9 under par from the upstate originally. A couple more South Carolina or guys with South Carolina ties in this thing. Lucas Glover with a pretty good tournament for him. The former U.S. Open winner ends up finishing tied for 32nd and 5 under par. But I mentioned Wesley Bryan there, the defending champ, former Gamecock at tied for 42nd. Jonathan Byrd, former Spring Valley High School, former Clemson Tiger, 1 under par, tied for 50th. Certainly a solid performance for him as well. And then the Clemson amateur Doc Redmond finishes that same 1 under, tied for 50th. So a lot of local guys involved, but not at the top of the leaderboard, unfortunately for them. And then you got a couple of international guys battling it out in sudden death ahead of the weather yesterday. They started this thing a little earlier. Are you one of those guys? Like, unfortunately for me, I was dumb enough to go to Twitter and got the spoiler. Without the spoiler alert text, I read what happened. So then now I was watching it and I already knew who was going to win. But still, even knowing that, like the way it played out in this thing, I never would have. Like, it was one of those things where I was like, did I read that right? Was somebody messing with me on Twitter that this guy's going to come back? When I turned it on, he's down 3 shots and it looked like he wasn't even in the mix. And
why did you go to Twitter?
Just dumb, bored. Checking things out, making sure nothing was going down too newsworthy. Trying to stay in the loop, Carey. Trying to stay in the loop. You were watching a bunch of NBA over the weekend. What impressed you? What sticks out?
I was, and I'll be the first to tell you, I don't watch a whole lot of NBA during the regular season because I'm more excited about college basketball, and most of my attention is paid to either college basketball or high school basketball. Mm-hmm. But during the playoffs, I look forward to it because you have more of a college-like atmosphere from a fan perspective. And I sat in my recliner all weekend long and did not move. And I watched basketball. Every game that came on, I watched it. Now, that's not to say I was locked into every game, but I watched every game this weekend. I think the one game that stands out more than anything was the one I saw yesterday. Anytime LeBron is on television, he's must-see television. But Oladipo from Indiana Pacers, those guys went to Cleveland and got it done. And that wasn't the story with Indiana getting it done, but I've often talked about how important confidence is in every facet of life, regardless of what level you're at, regardless of the type of arena you're a part of. But I think Oladipo's probably on his 3rd or 4th team, and the way he's playing right now looks nothing like he used to look last couple of years. And it's because he's confident. It's because he knows the team is his. He knows the coach has complete confidence in him. and he was the best basketball player on the floor last night. And LeBron James was on the floor. He was that good. And also, just a sidebar, anytime Lance Stevenson is on the floor with LeBron James, I think Jeff Van Gundy said it best. Oh, by the way, you ever listen to Jeff Van Gundy, Mark Jackson, and Mike Breen call a game?
Love those guys.
Unbelievable. The most entertaining.
I could listen to them go to the park and call somebody walking around there. Like the game is almost the side story. Like it's just there. They're going to make things entertaining.
Bill Walton, John Gruden, and that trio of Mark Jackson, Jeff Van Gundy, and Mike Breen, unbelievably entertaining. And Jeff Van Gundy said yesterday, anytime Lance Stevenson and LeBron James are on the floor together, there should just be one camera fixated on Lance Stevenson. He's that entertaining. And I know his name is coming up, some of the possible job openings. I'm hoping he doesn't leave Jeff Van Gundy, that is, because he's so good on television.
Oh, Mark Jackson also popping up for the Knicks opening as well. But Victor Oladipo, he's a guy who you probably, if you follow basketball, you know him from the Indiana days.
Yes.
And then he gets drafted and goes to Orlando for several years, Oklahoma City last year, and now with the Indiana Pacers, scored 32 last night. LeBron scores 24, 12, and 10 is his final stat line. So it's not like he played poorly, but, I mean, Indiana – They blew out Cleveland, right? I mean, they outscored them by 10 in the fourth quarter to win by 18. So I take that as a solid whipping. Up 19 after the first quarter, that's quite the message to send in the opening round of the first round of the playoffs on the road. And that's the
which is not the norm.
Right. In the NBA, it's pretty simple usually. You hold serve. You saw Chris Middleton, the South Carolina native, last night trying to steal one for the Bucks in Boston and send that thing to overtime with the buzzer beater.
Yes.
It didn't happen. Ultimately for the Bucks, they lose by 6 at home or on the road.
Chris Middleton played at Portugal down in Charleston, ended up playing this collegiate basketball at Texas A&M and got drafted by the Milwaukee Bucks. I think he just signed a new deal maybe a couple of years ago. And he also played in our SC Pro-Am. He came this summer, and that made my son so excited. I rode off for a minute yesterday to go and pick something up from the store, and Chris Middleton hit that three to send it into overtime, and my son was so excited, only because he got a chance to take a picture with Chris Middleton and saw him get like 40 in the SC Pro-Am. So now seeing it on television in the playoffs, make that same type of shot, you can imagine as a 13-year-old that's going to generate some form of excitement. And he called. He was off the charts with his excitement, and that's what it's all about, man. And it was fun watching a guy like that, watching Sindarius, and even seeing PJ Dozier on the bench last night in the mix. With those guys dancing with the rest of the team after Westbrook makes a big shot, and just those memories, seeing those young men grow up and evolve into being a part of this. Think about how big this moment is. Think about the magnitude of this moment, and these young guys from South Carolina getting an opportunity to share in it.
To carry on, Joyner from the Low Country as well, the new highly touted freshman quarterback for the Gamecocks, retweeting that buzzer beater last night, showing some
Charleston love.
8-4-3 pride for sure.
8-4-3 Charleston love.
Oklahoma City and every other home team yesterday. Oklahoma City, Houston, and Boston all winning. Cleveland, the only home team yesterday who did not win in the first round, the first game of the playoffs. That's why that really stands out. You got to go right to Indiana, Cleveland when you're looking for a headline for the weekend, and LeBron James going down in game number 1